This program was originally aired on September 7th of 1988.
Good evening, and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome two people that can speak to a recently produced film called Cover Up, which looks at the Iran-Contra hearings and some of the implications of what came out of that. And I'm pleased to have on the program, particularly Barbara Trent, who is the director and co-producer of the program, and I congratulate you very much on it and welcome you very much to the program, Barbara.
Thank you.
And on my far left is Trudy Mason, who is a media consultant and a long-term peace activist who's involved with the publicity and so forth involved in this film. Trudy, welcome very much to Conversations. Let's take it with you first, Barbara. I wonder if I could ask you, the film says that there are many things that came out of the Iran-Contra hearing that we haven't put sufficient attention to and focus on. I wonder maybe you could share with us, when did you get the idea of making the film? And then we are going to go into some clips and show the people some of the clips from it. But when did you get the idea? How did the gestation of the film get started? How did it get started?
Well, from watching the hearings and from watching the American public's response to the hearings, it was apparent that most people in the United States felt they weren't getting the truth. They could sense they were being lied to, but they didn't know which were the lies and what was behind the lies. We had been in discussions with a video manufacturer called MPI out of Chicago, and had opened the Los Angeles Times one day and noticed they were going to release, and they later sold, 50,000 copies of Oliver North's testimony. So we were outraged that this was going to be, as they called it, the testimony to history, right?
Yeah, the Ali Mania.
The Ali Mania.
Yeah,
right. So we called them up and told them what we thought of the release and how we thought it would impact the world, which obviously would be was disastrous if people believed what Oliver North said, and suggested that we put together a documentary far more interesting, far more intriguing, far more unbelievable, that was the truth, and that looked at all the major issues that did not come out in the hearings, that were suppressed.
Yeah. That were suppressed, about there being widespread and long-term covert activity going on daily within the operation of the American system, which had implications that really ought to be known, even though many people within the system responsible for those operations might not want us to know. It was the need for an investigative look at these things in the best sense of the word.
Yes, and not just that area of information. I mean, we really looked at the hearings themselves and tried to see what happened. Two men stood up at one point and yelled out, "What about the cocaine trafficking?" and unfurled a flag. Yeah. They were arrested and given a year in prison each. We thought they deserved an answer to that question. Jack Brooks brought up the issue of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Bush and North's attempt to turn that agency into a object of suppression of U.S. citizens who might dissent. And that question, Jack Brooks' question, was hammered down by Inouye in the hearings. We looked at the bomb at Lepanka that killed and injured journalists. And that issue was brought up by Jack Brooks also, and dismissed by Secord in his response. So we looked at the things that got carefully shuffled under the rug. And we looked at, and we approached the hearings with the concept that the hearings were in and of themselves a cover-up.
A cover-up for activity that's going on in the government that ought not to, and we ought to be aware of it, in the interest of allowing a democracy to be able to continue to function in the best sense of which we all like to think that we have a democracy that has been under threat by these activities that have been carried out by the United States government. You've been involved in peace activity and so forth. Many of the themes brought out in the films are ones that have been long part of the agenda as far as the peace activist community is concerned.
It's something that a lot of people have known and spoken about, but until recently, it's mainly been preaching to the choir. People like thinking for themselves. The wonderful and important thing about this film, and the reason that I've gotten involved, is that it gives us an opportunity to get this information out to the public at large, because this is a film. I can't really call it a piece of entertainment.
No.
But it is something that is in theatrical release. Today, it's been reviewed by the Los Angeles Times on their entertainment pages, in the Daily News in New York in their entertainment pages. Both very positive reviews. The reviews by film critics have been very positive. But in the reviews, the message of the film gets out. And at this time, during our presidential election season, it is so important to get this kind of message out. And the peace movement, the organized peace movement, so many organizations are going to be working with Barbara and the Empowerment Project in using this film to get the message out. Because this film, more than anything else that I've come across, really does answer the question, or helps answer the question, where was George?
Yeah, well, not only that, yes, it does, and of course there's a political year and so forth, but it also answers the question, where is the United States in a broad terms? Because the increased use of covert activity in an age where gunboat diplomacy, except maybe Grenada and Libya and other things, it hasn't been so obvious, it has been increasingly being used as an instrument of foreign policy, and there are increasingly activities being carried out by a secret organizational operation of the government, isn't accountable to the Congress, isn't accountable to the people, and it's something that calls into question the United States liking to think of ourselves as a repository of liberal values around the world and so forth, but really does call into question the role of the United States. It's difficult to get the citizens to consider the fact that their government, their operation, their system does not necessarily represent the good guys on a world scale, and it might make it possible for us to understand better many third world people's animosity toward the United States. Is important in the sense of self-criticism of our own system. Mr. Gorbachev's doing it in the United States, we should be doing it here. I mean, in a broader, long-term philosophical sense.
I think that, and for us, at the Empowerment Project, when we made the film, that's really the larger issue. We didn't make this film to focus on George Bush.
No, he was there.
He keeps coming out. We made this film because we believe that the American public will get just as good a government as it demands, and it won't be able to demand a very good government if it doesn't get a free press and doesn't find out and educate itself about what the United States government is doing.
Yeah. Right.
So our real basic contention is that we're looking at the long haul. We're not looking at this election or the next election. We're looking at trying to educate the American public about what has been going on, not just in the Reagan administration, but has been going on through many administrations. And it's the issue is the ways that we allow our government to attempt not only to suppress us in this country, but to suppress people in other countries to our advantage.
Right.
Can I also add that it deals with the whole Iran-Contra Gate affair, but it also deals in a much broader context with the whole area of covert activity.
Absolutely.
As you're going to be showing clips from the film, and many of the people interviewed in the film who speak are former CIA agents, people like John Stockwell and David McMichael, who speak about covert activities and what went on. These are people who have been speaking out. They've all come together in an organization that they formed called ARTIS, which is the Association for Rational Dissent. And that is so important. That's what we're talking about here.
Okay, fine.
Rational dissent and the need of the American public to know.
Okay, now that is good. This, in a certain sense, has set it up. We do have 4 clips that we're going to present during the course of this program. The first one that we want to run now, if we could, is just the beginning of the film. It runs rather long, almost 8-9 minutes or so, but it sets up the general theme of the whole film. Then we're going to go into some other clips and we'll discuss them as we come up to them and so forth. But maybe we could get and cue up that first clip, which is the actual opening of the film itself. And you in the audience can stay tuned. We're coming up with the opening few minutes of this incredibly exciting and interesting and controversial film put together by Barbara Trent. So if we could run that now, the first opening of the film, Cover Up. Thank you.
Did you watch the Iran-Contra hearings?
Yes, I did.
Yes, I did.
Portions of it.
I watched it for a few days.
I watched a lot of it. My husband was addicted to it.
I watched very little of it.
But I did follow it very closely, yes.
Do you think they're telling the truth?
No, not really.
Not the whole truth.
I think they're under oath, so I think they're telling the truth.
They couldn't remember. They all had lobotomies. Then nobody could remember anything. You talk about senility. Holy cow.
They were lying about most everything.
There is a lot more to the story, but whether or not we'll ever find out about it is another question.
What you saw in the Iran-Contra hearings was the exposure of the beginnings of a national security state which believes it has the right to override the Constitution of the United States in the name of security.
I think that there was a substantial shadow government trying to run foreign affairs for the United States.
In any other country, it would have been called a coup. And they seem to have gotten away with it.
I'd hate to think, as many of my colleagues here have already expressed themselves, that in the process, we have shredded our own democratic fabric.
These are modern-day pirates, these guys. They have escaped, essentially, the control of national governments, but they're available for use by national governments. Sometimes they move under color of and defend themselves as advancing U.S. national interests in this. But I think that's very secondary with these guys. They're out to make a buck.
I did do it. I am not, as I said in my statement, at all ashamed of any of the things that I did. I was given a mission, and I tried to carry it out.
The Iran-Contra hearings, convened in May 1987, by a special joint committee of the United States Congress to investigate the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran and the illegal diversion of money to the Contras. For 13 weeks, the hearings were broadcast on national television. Over 30 people testified, and the committee issued a 700-page report of its findings. But there are still many important questions that the Select Committee left unanswered and unexplored. Often, the official explanation seemed inadequate and contradictory.
Our government has a firm policy not to capitulate to terrorist demands, that no concessions policy remains in force. In spite of the wildly speculative and false stories about arms for hostages and alleged ransom payments, we did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
Despite Reagan's denials, investigations soon revealed that arms had been traded for hostages held in the Mideast.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Only days later, it was further revealed that the arms to Iran had been severely marked up. Some of the profits had been illegally diverted to support the Contras, a guerrilla force organized by the CIA fighting the Nicaraguan government. The Reagan administration had a major scandal on its hands.
What's been going on that had been kept from me in various covert operations.
President, did they deceive you? You didn't answer whether Poindexter and North deceived you.
We had weapons being sold by the Pentagon under the Economy Act to the CIA, and the CIA selling them to a third party or an agent, in the case of General Secord, who would then complete the transactions.
I'm just trying to find out where the authorities were coming from to do these activities. I mean, clearly, there was no congressional oversight over this because it was kept totally hidden from the Congress. From whom would you have to get the green light in order to make the request, or the direction, I take it, to Secord to move ahead?
Well, as I have testified, Senator, I talked to Director Casey, I talked to Mr. McFarland, I talked to Admiral Poindexter.
The use of U.S. government money for supporting the overthrow of the Nicaraguan government was specifically prohibited when Congress enacted the Boland Amendment in 1984. Even though it remained in effect until 1986, millions of dollars in profits from Iranian arms sales were secretly diverted to the Contras during this period through contacts with middlemen such as Moniker Ghorbanifar.
Mr. Ghorbanifar took me into the bathroom, and Mr. Ghorbanifar suggested several incentives to make that February transaction work. And the attractive incentive for me was the one he made, that residuals could flow to support the Nicaraguan resistance.
Even Ghorbanifar knew that you were supporting the Contras.
Yes, he did. Izvestia knew it. The name had been in the papers in Moscow. It had been all over Danny Ortega's newscast. Radio Havana was broadcasting it. It was in every newspaper in the land.
All our enemies knew it, and you wanted to conceal it from the United States Congress.
We wanted to be able to deny a covert operation.
Did these hearings uncover the full story behind the Contragate scandal? Or was it merely an attempt to keep the real truth hidden from public view? Peter Dale Scott, professor at the University of California at Berkeley, has conducted extensive research on covert action and CIA activities. The results are detailed in his book, The Iran-Contra Connection.
I think the real issue was that both the administration and the majority of the people in the committees were frightened that the real scandals, the drug scandals, for example, would really threaten any future conduct of covert operations on the scale that they had been handled in the past. And so they were trying very deliberately to limit the damage. This was damage control. Look only at the Iran arms sales and the alleged diversion to the Contras.
The American people may very well feel that the important questions didn't get asked. So they don't have the whole picture. They have a few little transactions and nauseating detail on those few transactions, but they were cheated out of the whole bowl of wax.
And so they were pulling their punches on all the major questions and issues of what really happened in this thing, what the CIA's role was. Anytime they got into anything that was really sensitive about exactly that, exactly what the CIA's role was and exactly what laws were broken and when, they went into secret session, which means that we the people won't be, we won't ever know.
Like you, I do not wish to see secrets of this land inadvertently and accidentally made public. Accordingly, the panel will enter into executive session.
In addition to facts that were hidden from the public through secrecy in executive sessions, other evidence was simply destroyed.
When you got back to examining what they had done, they systematically destroyed and shredded all of the documentation, as much as they could get. Hours of shredding. Altered some of the documents that remained. Stole what they couldn't shred. Now this gives you an indication that there may be a few things they did that they didn't want the public to know.
I shredded. I was never told not to shred. I shredded because I thought it was the right thing to do. When I didn't have a shredder, I put it in a burn bag and they were burned.
Weren't you going through your files to get rid of embarrassing documents?
Embarrassing? No. Documents that would compromise the national security of the United States, documents that would put lives at risk, documents that would demonstrate a covert action in U.S. direction and control and relationship to it, yes. Embarrassing? No.
My memory is very unclear about how the shredding incident started. I believe, as I said, my memory is that he began pulling documents and I joined him.
And did you surmise that this was a way of trying to cover up something in conjunction with the Iran initiative or the Contra initiative?
I I don't use the word cover-up. I would use the word protect.
That's extremely interesting, and it's a really succinct piece of editing, beautiful editing, putting together a number of the themes that are covered in the overall film itself, and it sets it up very nicely. We're going to be able to go into some of those themes here in this program. We can't go into them all. One of the aspects of the film that comes out and follows soon after this is a revelation of going back and trying to get at some of the historical roots of this shadow government and the idea of there being things going on that we hadn't been aware of, was that at the time of the special relationship developed between the United States and Iran may well have been done to be established before the election in 1980, and that there was a deal could have been made between the representation in the United States, say Republican representation, that the release of our hostages be held off until after the election in order to favor the election of a non-incumbent president. So what Barbara Honecker brings that out. That's something that comes up in the film that is very interesting, and what kind of a relationship there was between the United States government and Iran, and historically laid the ground roots for some sort of a special arms dealing and so forth with Iran. It's very, very interesting.
It's always the part of the film that grabs people the most. The thought that for political gain, someone would not only sell arms to Iran against the international embargo that we asked for, but would do that to have the Iranians hold the hostages so that Jimmy Carter couldn't spring them and win the election. That is definitely one of the most shocking revelations that comes out of the film. And additional information continues to be revealed. I think what's critically important about the film is that it throws into the public light stories that the mainstream media ought to be investigating. I mean, these are the hottest stories out there.
Indeed, yeah.
And they're not. And our strategy, of course, is by taking this film directly to people through independent theaters across the country, and eventually through retail video stores, that it'll become an issue. We'll get it right to the American public. It'll become an issue. And then, you know, the mainstream media always covers things once the eggs are on the table. They don't want to look like they're not up with the news.
Yeah, if you can get past the gatekeepers, as it were, and so forth,
Well,
which is unfortunate to have to do it. But
this is a way of getting past the gatekeepers, because the fact, as I started saying before, that you have almost a news story on the entertainment pages, because the reviewers really don't know how to deal with this documentary. Because it's giving them information that is mind-boggling.
Yes, yes.
And so what they do in many cases is repeat the revelations that are made in the film. So then people reading a movie review are suddenly reading a news story. And it is a news story that's in a historical context, but is relevant to what is going on today. Because it's important, especially during a presidential campaign, that the facts become known.
Not only in the
but if in fact in 1980 this did happen, and we were all, anybody who was active in the political process in 1980, or who even voted in 1980, and was obviously being so manipulated, people should know about that, so they're aware of it now. And so right now, getting this information out to the public, and yes, in a convoluted way, but if you hold a press conference, Barbara Honecker has had many press conferences about this. They're not covered. So you do it in a convoluted way, because sometimes, unfortunately, in today's world, the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line.
Well, I want to say the film's not convoluted.
No, not the film. The film is very direct. No, I'm saying the way that we're getting this information out.
Kind of through the back door.
And it also presents a view of the country that many people just don't want to hear. It's very hard when you have a government that is doing a great deal of disinformation, actually manipulating the press. It's good that there be some place where some alternative view might be able to be made available, and one of the places is in the film Cover-Up. So why don't we go to that clip now? It's Barbara Honecker, largely, but others who are involved in this general question of what the historical background was to the relationship between the political system of the United States and Iran. So let's run that tape now. Please stay tuned. Coming up, a clip on that particular aspect, one aspect of the extremely interesting aspect of this film. Thank you.
Do you think we sold arms to Iran?
Iran? Well, to get the hostages out, strictly to get the hostages out.
I think some people really believe that there were moderate elements there that might, help us in the future.
I really think their main focus was to free the hostages.
They say it was to help the Contras in Nicaragua, but I don't believe that's true.
It was to get the money, I believe.
And that reason could be anything. They can tell us anything on TV.
Iran is a crucial economic, geographic country. The U.S. wants to get them friendly again as quickly as possible.
Perhaps the most explosive issue that was not investigated in the hearings was the true nature of the arrangement with Iran. When did the U.S. actually begin selling weapons to Iran, and why?
The most important thing to come out of the hearings is what didn't even get asked at the hearings, and that was Ronald Reagan cut a deal with Iran before the 1980 election to send arms to Iran in exchange for Iran's agreeing to delay the release of our 52 hostages.
Barbara Honegger was a dedicated member of the Reagan-Bush presidential campaign in 1980. She worked on the special writing, research, and policy staff, and later as a White House policy analyst.
As part of my position, I was required to cover the 11 o'clock evening news in the Operations Center. The campaign was afraid that Jimmy Carter would successfully bring the 52 hostages home, what we called the October surprise, and win the election. There had been a feeling of panic in the campaign.
The 56 hostages taken captive at the U.S. Embassy in Iran in 1979 became a major issue in Jimmy Carter's campaign for re-election to a second term as president. His repeated efforts to gain their release failed, and Ronald Reagan was elected by a wide margin. After 14 months in captivity, the hostages were finally released, January 21st, 1981, the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration. Now working as a private investigator, Barbara Honegger has researched the hostage question carefully. According to reports gathered from a number of sources, she has distilled the following information.
There were 2 meetings that we know of for certain to date that happened, one in Washington, D.C., and one in Paris, France, before the 1980 election in October of 1980, where George Bush, then vice presidential candidate, Richard Allen, who became Reagan's first national security advisor, Donald Gregg, who became Bush's national security advisor and still is, passed millions of dollars to the Iranians to delay the release of our 52 hostages an additional 76 days. They met with an emissary of the Khomeini regime who offered a deal that they thought Reagan and Bush could not refuse, and that was, we will delay the release of the 52 hostages if you will promise us all the arms that we could possibly want in the war against Iraq once you become president of the United States.
The man who was president of Iran during the hostage crisis was Abul Hassan Bani Sadr. He was later ousted in a coup and is now living in exile in Paris. Bani Sadr supports the charges that a deal was made with the Reagan-Bush campaign to delay the hostages' release. In a recent interview, he confirms that the Paris meeting took place and states that George Bush was specifically identified as being at the meeting by Iranian intelligence reports. Also identified were Monikar Ghorbanifar and Albert Hakim, who later emerged as key middlemen in the Iran-Contra scandal. As evidence of this agreement, Bani Sadr has made documents available showing written orders for shipment of American parts and weapons to Iran through an Israeli-owned company.
And in fact, we now know that those arms began flowing in late February, early March of 1981, not as the White House would have you believe in 1985.
I want to get to the bottom of this and find out all that has happened, and so far, I've told you all that I know, and you know the truth of the matter is, for quite some long time, all that you knew is what I told you.
The bottom line is that the Iran-Contra Committee and the Walsh investigation, because their mandates only take us back to 1984, in and of themselves are a cover-up.
That really is revelatory, and I think people are going to be following through on that. Barbara Honegger's talking Others are talking now. More evidence is coming out in that regard, and you find there's a great deal of interest in that particular aspect, and there's increased probing and perhaps raising of that question by more and more people within the media, as it should be raised?
The media hasn't, as always, been doing a very, very good job of continuing to discover and investigate the story. There are people who are working on it. The Larry King Show talked to Jimmy Carter not too long ago and asked him about this story. And at that point, as far as he wanted to go, was to say that he knew he was getting intelligence reports that the Reagan-Bush campaign were in contact with the Iranians and were trying to cut such a deal. And he doesn't say whether or not, he says his information didn't tell him whether or not for sure they cut the deal.
Yeah, right.
But there's lots of revelations starting to come out now. We're getting more information out of the intelligence services of Iran for those years. Of course, Bonnie Sauter has given some additional interviews recently to a West German team whose tape video we'll have shortly. And there's some speculation that the reason that nobody wants to talk about this, I mean, nobody wants to talk about this, is that the Carter administration actually was possibly in the process of cutting a deal.
Trying to make a deal as well.
The same deal.
Yeah, right.
But to spring the hostages.
Yeah, right.
But against the international embargo of weapons. So it's one more situation where the big picture, the covert activities, the way we function within the world is the real issue.
Yeah, right.
You know, the fact that anyone would cut as sleazy a deal as holding hostages 76 additional days is, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the fact that you say is we don't have
but
absolute...
nobody wants to talk about it,
and
because everybody's dirty.
The fact you don't have absolutely proof positive of that there are revelations of things, begs for an investigative media coverage of this issue, and it should be brought up in the media most certainly. There are other aspects in the film as well to try and help uncover those things. It takes the time. There are other aspects of the film having to do with some very unsordid kind of allegations and activities, such as drug running, government-ordered assassination of people and so forth, that we're going to want to get to. But unfortunately, we have to, at this particular point, take a break for a couple of PSAs and so forth. So let's take a break. We'll be coming right back with more from this incredibly exciting film, Cover Up, and we're here happy to be talking with the director and producer of the film, Barbara Trent. Okay, please stay tuned. We'll be coming right back in just 1 minute. Thank you.
Everywhere around the world, they come to America.
When 17 million desperate people came to America, they came here to Ellis Island first. Half of all Americans have ancestors who passed through here. Age, weather, and vandalism have wrecked it. Donations are needed for its restoration. If you still believe in all they accomplished, send your contribution to Ellis Island Foundation, P.O. Box Ellis, New York 10163.
And that this free society speaks with power, force, and decision. In this crusade,
the political machine that put these people into office is still run by the same person. You. Democracy. It can't be of the people and for the people if it's not by the people. Vote.
Back again, speaking with Barbara Trent on this film. There were so many aspects of the film. We've had a chance to view it and so forth that we said to you a certain way we would like to have shown the whole film. It holds together so well. I congratulate you on the editing and the continuity and so forth. But there's so many aspects brought up. We only get a couple of them. One of the revelations, and again, things aren't always absolutely conclusive, but a great deal of evidence to the fact that official CIA operatives were involved in an official capacity with official backing in the not only of taking arms into Central America, but in a reverse pattern of bringing drugs, cocaine, back into the United States in a government-sanctioned way. An incredibly damning condemnation, particularly while we've had to see so many of the anti-drug campaigns being enunciated at the very top of our government. That's another particularly sordid aspect of what's been able to be uncovered by these Iran hearings, I guess, right? Maybe you could direct yourself to that?
Sure, and I think it's important to note that in that area, the evidence is enormous and conclusive and profound and growing, but it's already just there's a wealth of information and a wealth of evidence and testimonies. And in the papers that were released during the Iran-Contra hearings, there's discussions between the CIA, between North and Secord, between a variety of these guys saying, Jiminy Christmas, you know, these guys we're dealing with are all drug dealers. I mean, basically.
Yeah, and it involved such...
Not only is it evidence that it was happening, but evidence that everybody knew it was happening, and it was part of, and it continues to be part of, the way we fund covert operations, the way we facilitate
Yes,
them.
in a very real sense, it's convenient not to have to go through the Congressional, particularly in, with Boland amendments and things like that, that we don't have to go through the Congressional getting funds. It's an avenue to tremendous sums of money. I mean, billions with a B is involved in terms of drug trafficking. Some of that money can be skimmed off for arms to people that they're trying to support, that they can't get support through the congressional democratic process.
And for impacting elections in the United States.
And to add to the thesis of Barbara's film, as she said before, that the hearings, the Contragate hearings in themselves were a cover-up. Those were broadcast by the media nationwide during prime time, during soap opera time. Senator John Kerry has been holding hearings on the whole CIA drug connection and drug trafficking. Most people don't even know that those hearings have been going on or that they exist. They certainly have not gotten any live coverage and very little notice in the media at all. So the media is part of this too, because the media commits these sins of omission. They influence what the public knows by just omitting coverage of things.
Well, again, it comes back to the fact that the truth, or the aspects of the truth as we would see it here, is so monumentally damning of the system. People in the United States tend to think of the United States as an essentially, liberal, an essentially enlightened nation. We go back to the sense of unity during the Second War. After that period, the United States was seen as a beacon to many. Ellis Island has been seen as a beacon to many. We like to think patriotically that our country stands for really first-rate kinds of values that we try to aspire to. And we have this sordid picture of the reality, and it's not something that people are going to want to accept at first hand. But certainly the media should be trying to bring these things up, and certain kind of people in the name of truth. If you understand what I'm saying, it's difficult to put these kind of propositions before people, particularly since politically people usually want to give out good images in order to get elected, and people want to think well of themselves and their nation.
And the media wants to please its corporate owners, and its corporate owners include some of the largest arms dealers and nuclear builders in the world. I mean, GE owns NBC now.
Yes,
I mean, put it together.
Yeah, the media is very, very close. And the arms manufacture, drugs and arms are two of the very largest aspects of the overall operation of the world economy. And here we have apparently Americans and Americans at the top of this seemingly shadow government being involved at the very top of that. It's very, very disconcerting to think
that's why it's so important that when people go to the theaters, and they must go to the theaters to see this film, that they then contact their local media. And Barbara's going to talk about, where the film is opening and where it's going to be. But that they then contact their local media. These are the people who buy the newspapers, who watch the TV channels and buy the products of the sponsors, and say, why aren't you covering this? I'm going to stop buying your paper, I'm going to stop buying your soap suds unless you cover this issue. And that's the way, it's dollars and cents, that's the way our system works. We might as well realize that, but it's the public that can influence what the media covers. So they've got to see this film and then say to the media, cover these facts.
It really does call for media attention, particularly since, as you say, this was a government, the hearings were established, and yet the people in the government, and you see what the government was doing was, in a sense, covering up for itself. You think also the international media, other nations who perhaps have a a view of this country that perhaps we aren't, they're not so involved in it, they well ought to be involved in this. But certainly media people and people who are concerned with these things, it absolutely cries out for their kind of attention. Well, as I say, we would like to have shown the whole film, but we've got another clip here that does deal with this, again, sordid issue, but that's part of the realities that we have to investigate. This piece we have coming up, about 4 or 5 minutes or so, has to do with some of the allegations that the United States and the CIA, representatives of the United States government, even hinting at the highest level, have been involved in the sordid business of smuggling drugs, cocaine in large dimension, back into the United States. Very disconcerting, but we'll give it to you now. So let's roll that tape, the drug runners.
There have been a lot of allegations thrown around that the Contra resupply operation was involved in cocaine trafficking.
We found absolutely no evidence during my tenure at the NSC that any of the resistance leaders were themselves or their subordinates involved in drug running.
Although there was enough evidence to warrant investigation into CIA drug trafficking, there was no serious interest on the part of committee members, and no first-hand witnesses were called. At one point, the hearings were disrupted by 2 observers who burst out in protest. For these actions, the protesters were handed down stiff jail sentences of over a year each.
They never got into drugs, even though it kept coming up in their face. They had got declassified a lot of memos from Robert Owen in which he was telling Oliver North that there were Contra leaders who were involved in the drug traffic. The only questions they allowed on this was to sort of smooth it over or to blame it on somebody else.
A news program over the weekend suggested that Rob Owen, who testified earlier, was involved in drug smuggling. Now, is there any truth to that? Can you shed any light for us on that subject?
Absolutely false. Mr. Owen is the last person, perhaps right beside me, that would ever be engaged in those kinds of activities.
In the early 1980s, when the CIA was working to establish a southern front in Costa Rica in the war against Nicaragua, a relationship was established with John Hull, an American rancher living in Costa Rica. There is mounting evidence that the airstrips on Hull's ranch became not only a delivery point for illegal Contra weapon shipments from the U.S., but were also used for transporting cocaine into the United States.
You have CIA bases in Costa Rica and Honduras. You have airplanes flying back and forth continuously, landing at bases in the United States where they don't have to go through regular customs, with the CIA escorting the people in and out in a certain laissez-faire in the attitude at best of the customs, if there is any customs representation there. So it's a dream situation for drug smugglers.
Gary Betzner, who is also serving time for drug smuggling, worked as a pilot for George Morales.
George said he wanted me to fly a couple loads of guns and bring coke back from Costa Rica. And he gave me the directions to John Hull's ranch, who's a CIA operative in Costa Rica. I left approximately midnight, arrived at John Hull's ranch about 7 o'clock in the morning, offloaded the guns, loaded 500 keys of cocaine on the plane. I gassed the aircraft myself, loaded it, and departed. And each time I did it, I paid myself 20 kilos, which is approximately $400,000.
Despite our best efforts, illegal cocaine is coming into our country at alarming levels, and 4 to 5 million people regularly use it. 500,000 Americans are hooked on heroin. 1 in 12 persons smokes marijuana regularly.
Our job is never easy because drug criminals are ingenious. They work every day to plot a new and better way to steal our children's lives, just as they've done by developing this new drug, crack. For every door that we close, they open a new door to death.
This administration is impossible to embarrass to begin with. I mean, they rely on the old rule of deny, 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 despite the vast amounts of evidence that is available. And as we talked earlier, there is the tendency within the Congress and within large sections of, first of all, the establishment media
simply to reject this sort of thing. It can't be happening. If Nancy Reagan is saying just no to drugs, how can drugs be running by the same freedom fighters that she embraces at various banquets?
The weapons trade and the narcotics trade in the world are two of the top 5 major money-making transactions in the whole world. These two major commodities in the world are hundreds of billions of dollars that go on. They could pay the money of the national debt for whole countries. In fact, Jorge Ochoa and Pablo Escobar agreed to pay the entire national debt of Colombia if, in fact, Colombia would agree not to allow them to be extradited. And it would still leave both of these guys multi-billionaires. So the amount of money that we're talking about here is absolutely gargantuan. And all that the intelligence community, these guys have gone outside the governmental structures, are tapping into hundreds of millions, which they need to run their operations.
Back again now with Barbara Trent, and these things that are brought up, there's so many things that are brought up in the film that are, again, go right to the core of the organization of our society and are very, very, very disconcerting and so forth. That is obviously one, and we couldn't get into all the things. There are allegations in the film of assassination that have been ordered at the top level of our government and so forth. And other aspects, it's very, very disquieting and something that I just wish that we could have gotten into all the allegations, the drug running over in Asia that has been taking place, and I mean that have been involved. So these things, did you find yourself as you were doing that, you found things that you expected as you began to look into some of these issues? I mean, just from a philosophical perspective.
Well, we learned a lot.
Yeah,
as we
you learn. It's a learning
investigated.
experience. Yes.
We had a general idea of what we were looking for, but then it was always surprising the kinds of details that we came up with. And of course, we have enough material to make a documentary on every one of these little
That's
vignettes.
right. Yeah, that's right.
So the real chore and challenge of the documentary was to try to somehow get this into a nutshell that people could relate to, that made the connections between the assassinations and the drug running and these associations of folks that work around the world, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and people like Church and Pike and liberal Democrats being defeated with potentially offshore money. You know, the issue is to bring that all together and try to help Americans, United States citizens, look at that it really is affecting their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got to stop calling this politics.
Yeah, just politics, and some sort of a cynical saying, that's just be realistic, don't be naive, and so forth. And you certainly have done that. You've taken an overview, and you've given us that overview, and as you say, each of these things could be gone into in greater depth, not only by yourselves, but by others, and certainly ought to be gone into depth by concerned citizens, and certainly by people in the media. We want to show now just the end of the tape, the end of the program. It's about a 5-minute clip we want to show that sort of summarizes a great deal of this. And also, we're going to run the credits that are associated with that, with music by Ruben Blades, and so forth. And we want to run that credit because this was an act of involving a great many people. This wasn't done with great corporate backing and in a traditional way. A lot of real human beings were involved in this effort, as it were. And we want to try and here on this program, and we give credit to all those folks. It was a collaborative effort of many. So we're going to run the tail end of the end of the program now, and then we'll come back for a wrap-up now. But let's run that piece now that sort of, in a sense, finishes the film, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the dimensions of how people in the audience might be able to have more active involvement with this process that the film is a part of. Okay, let's run that tape now, the end of the film, cover-up. Thank you.
Do you think the Iran-Contra scandal will have an effect on future government operations?
No, I think it will be more of the same.
I don't think that it's going to have much of an effect at all. I just think that they'll be more careful next time.
They will continue to carry on covert operations. I think this has been going on forever.
They make laws which are for us that they don't seem to be able to, they don't apply them to themselves very often.
And who is going to inhibit them? The gangsters that are running this country is going to inhibit somebody.
What's happening here, my friends, is a major deception a major deception which is in process as we stand and talk tonight, a major deception in the same way that the Warren Commission was a major deception worked upon the American people, the same way that the Watergate investigation was a major deception worked upon the American people. Just like the bombing, the secret bombing of Cambodia was kept secret and was a deception worked upon the American people. How long are we going to stand for being deceived in this manner?
We will have to make a decision as a country, both Congress and executive, that we will not tolerate this kind of activity and we will go after the perpetrators. These people do have faces. When we talk about the shadow government or we talk about the secret team, it's not something totally amorphous. These people are identifiable and can be brought to justice.
Assassination, drug smuggling. If they had pursued that line of questioning, they would have soon gotten themselves into a position where they would have had to impeach someone. They could track that right back into the White House. They could put it at least right under the nose of Ronald Reagan.
This is the major constitutional crisis since the Civil War. You have a president who is unaccountable and says that it's his interpretation of what laws he'll select to obey. When you have that, you have a constitutional crisis.
All of these things that have been alleged for years and have been speculated and have been charged and have been consistently denied are being confirmed. And these documents have shown an incredible array of efforts, all of which were denied to Congress repeatedly and flat-out lies by top members of the administration and by the president.
It is not a CIA gone wild or a secret government operating on its own. It's a group of people doing things with the authority of and at the direction of the White House.
Covert operations have never done this country any good. They may be of momentary advantage to the people who are in power at a particular moment, but in terms of the interests of this country as a whole, they have proven disastrous. There isn't a single one in 30 years that you can point to and say, well, that was one that we are now more secure, better off, and happier as a result of. Every one of them has in its own way contributed to the deterioration of security in the world that we live in. And so it's really time to stop them.
Instead of operating within rules and law, we have been supplying lethal weapons to terrorist nations, trading arms for hostages, involving the U.S. government in military activities in direct contravention of the law, diverting public funds into private pockets and secret unofficial activities, selling access to the president for thousands of dollars, dispensing cash and foreign money orders out of a White House safe, accepting gifts and falsifying papers to cover it up, altering and shredding national security documents, lying to the Congress. Now, I believe that the American people understand that democracy cannot survive that kind of abuse.
There was a time when ignorance made our innocence strong. There was a time when we all thought that could do no wrong. There was a time so long ago. There was a time
That's beautiful. I think now at the end, we only have a couple of minutes here left at the end, and I think probably what most of the people in the audience, hopefully the people in the audience will be wanting to know is how can they have more to do with this film? It's going to be in theatrical release and so forth, and how can people be involved in terms of having more of this? What are some of the realities there, Barbara?
Well, there's lots of ways to be involved, and most of the people's names you saw in the credits were people who wanted to help, volunteered, and worked as part of the team to produce this film.
Yeah, right.
People can get in touch with us. They can write the Empowerment Project at 1653 18th Street, Suite 3 in Santa Monica, California, 90404. And they can find out where it's playing in their community, or if a theater in their community has not booked it, they can help us make those arrangements.
Okay.
If it's not yet been released in videotape in their community, which always follows the theatrical release, they can get in touch with us and we'll let them help us do that in their town also. There's really a lot of ways people can help.
Yeah.
And they really, I encourage people to get in touch who want to not make suggestions on what else we should do.
Yeah, right.
But who want to do something in their community to bring this to more people.
Yeah, well, it's the intent of the film and the tenor and everything of it. It's of the people. It's of that kind of a film. So good. Yeah.
And Barbara may not mention this, but you talked about corporate sponsorship.
Yeah.
This film was done with donated services, and Barbara is in debt for having done this film.
Well,
so that's one way that people can help also.
Yeah, well,
because we need to encourage filmmakers like Barbara Trent to keep on getting the message out to the public.
This wasn't done by a grant from the CIA.
No.
Or their cohorts. It's a pleasure. Sorry, we're right out of time. It's been your pleasure again. Let me remind you once again, on my far left have Trudy Mason, who's a press consultant and peace activist of long-standing, who's working with Barbara on the film. And on my immediate left, principal guest, Barbara Trent, director, co-producer of this incredibly exciting film, Cover Up. Thank you very much for viewing Way on Conversations. Invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back next week. We'll see you then. Ladies, once again, thank you very, very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Good night. We'll see you next week. This program was originally aired on September 7th of 1988.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations 40 years ago, may not be a legally binding document. It is rather a promise made by all the members of the United Nations to the people of the world. We at Amnesty International believe that the governments who have adopted the Declaration have a moral responsibility to keep that promise.
Write Amnesty International, Post Office Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.
This may be the best-kept secret in the world, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 40 years ago, the United Nations wrote and adopted it. Every single member country has promised to support it, every single one. They also promised to teach, publicize, and display it. Have you ever heard of it? To get your copy, write Amnesty International, P.O. Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.
This may be the best-kept secret in the world, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To get your copy, write Amnesty International, Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.